If you choose to join us, you want your muskets back, you can have them. Nothing more will be said by anybody anywhere. If you choose not to join us, well, you can come along under guard, and when this is all over, I will do what I can to see you get a fair treatment, but for now, we're moving out. Gentlemen, I think if we lose this fight, we lose the war. So if you choose to join us, I'll be personally very grateful.
Powerful, yet simple. Sincere, honest, captivating. Out to set men free. We're fighting for each other. Incidentally, all but 4 men joined the colonel, and before the battle was over, the remaining 4 joined in. The power of shared vision. Fundamental to vision becoming a reality are the guides which the organization articulates so employees know how to act, namely values. Each individual has a set of values that guide their personal lives. And the more clarity one has about their own values, the easier it is for the individual to choose those organizations which support and nurture their values. Like an individual, organizations have values. Hundreds of decisions are made throughout the organization daily which are based on either the articulated or the assumed value sets. Highly successful leaders make it a point of making sure the values of their organization are clearly defined and shared. For shared values are the foundation of building productive and genuine working relationships, says Jim Kouzes. And last year we learned that alignment between the 2 value systems are a predictor of employee satisfaction, organization turnover, and how operating performance is linked to value congruence. Recall also that the journey of how the organization arrives at the definition of its values is as important as the definition of the values themselves. The dialogue your employees have is essential. From our experience, this point cannot be overemphasized. The journey requires all employees to participate in the process and together agree on the definitions. Participation is essential. For having contributed their own ideas, employees take ownership. The 4th discipline discussed by Senge is team learning. Why team learning? Think of your businesses, the businesses of your customers, the businesses of your partners. In today's business world, collaborative teams are the fundamental functional unit, and they are the fundamental learning unit. Team learning is the process of aligning and developing the capacity of the team to create the results its members truly desire. It builds on the discipline of developing a commitment to a shared vision. It builds upon personal mastery. Talented teams are comprised of talented individuals. For the team to learn, they must think insightfully about complex issues, act in a coordinated way, and foster other teams to learn. The discipline of team learning, says Senge, begins with dialogue, the capacity of members of the team to suspend assumptions and enter into genuine thinking together. The team must recognize how patterns of interaction on the team may undermine learning. And like all teams, they must practice. One of the tools to help teams practice are facilitators. The role of the facilitator helps the team remain on the issue. They ensure the focus of the meeting is not on personal issues, but on the business problems. They also assist teams in understanding how the members of the team interact. Let's review. In summary, the disciplines of personal mastery, mental models, vision, team learning are connected by the discipline of systems thinking. And by interacting with the other disciplines, it allows organizations to be more effective. Systems thinking can help us see the flaws in our mental models. Systems thinking allows us to understand what reality is so we can move toward a shared vision. Systematic thinking allows learning teams to deal with dynamic complexity with a common language. Essentially, the disciplines release people to contribute more and be much more effective. They allow people to learn together. Moving from the thoughts of Peter Senge, I would like to share an approach we are using to become more of a learning organization which unleashes the power of human potential and which uses Senge's principles, but describes them in a different, more strategic way. It's an approach described by Nick Imparato and Oren Harari, co-authors of the book Jumping the Curve. First, let's briefly look at Nick and Oren's premises for their 4 organizing principles. They describe that we are now moving into a new epoch, an age of information. We've all heard of the information age described before. But how is it being described, and how are we understanding it? What are the mental models we are using? Are we describing it in the words of the industrial age? Nick and Oren contend that when the world enters a new epoch, the rules change so fundamentally that none of the old models work. Totally new models have to be learned. If there are no models, and the new models have to be created in our businesses to enter this age, we have to ask ourselves, what roles do we as leaders play? Mr. Marks, the president of one of our business units, recently said, "I don't know about you, but I got the way I am through years of practice reinforced because it worked." Well, it may not work anymore. This is a very different company than the one most of us joined. There is a new variable in the old equation defining performance. The old equation is performance equals ability times motivation. Nick and Oren redefine the equation as performance is equal to ability times motivation times the accuracy of role perception. Nick writes, "There is an overarching element in the accuracy of role perception. The individual manager sells himself or herself as an agent of change in an environment of new and emerging realities. As leaders of teams, as leaders of diverse groups who must collaborate daily, as leaders of teams which are constantly learning, what is my role? What is your role?" Since today's leaders are being asked to deal with realities in ways that are radically and qualitatively different from anything they've ever known, Nick would say they are being asked to jump the curve. From the conventional, that which has worked for so long, into the untried. They offer 4 organizing principles to help leaders and managers make the shift. The first priority, they say, is to recognize that innovation and creativity, rather than controls, order and predictability, are the key dynamics needed to achieve market leadership and profitability. The environment you create as leaders is critical. As one of my bosses says, the new environment requires leaders, not managers. Things are moving so fast, there is no time to manage, only lead. Leaders must create the environment where innovation and creativity are rewarded and where the people manage themselves. The dilemma is that you may need to leave behind today's successful products and services and look ahead toward tomorrow's products. The top leaders of a very large brokering firm is wrestling with this very issue today. The products which made them successful and which they have refined through the quality process may be the same products which will put them out of business unless they move to create the next market. So Nick and Oren define their first principle as, look a customer ahead. In Senge's terms, this may be systems thinking and mental models. If the new work environment is so focused on information and knowledge, then the intangible assets, collaborative brain power of the employees, managers, partners, and stakeholders are the most critical components of sustaining a competitive advantage. Nick and Oren believe that the most successful organizations will see themselves as brains or reservoirs of the accumulated intelligence of their employees and business partners. This leads to the second organizing principle. Build the company around the software and build the software around the customer. Senge might say personal mastery and learning teams. Before leaving this principle, Nick and Orrin introduced the idea that technology is an integral part of all facets of achieving the company's vision. Pictorially, it might look like this: one where technology is not an overlay to a process, but is the process, the fabric of how the functions, strategies, values, and visions are achieved. In the second segment, I will return to this concept with examples of how several companies approach implementing this concept. Organizations functioning in the information world lose vertical and horizontal boundaries. Collaboration and diversity replace traditional supervision. The underlying key to harnessing the talents and capabilities across dispersed geography is a clear vision with a defined set of values and priorities. How the organization supports the vision and values is paramount. This leads Nick and Orrin to their third organizing principle for leaders: ensure that those who live the values and the ideals of the organization are the most rewarded and the most satisfied. Senge may say systems thinking, mental models, and shared vision. From experience, supporting the right people can be the most powerful tool available to leaders to engage employees. Commerce exists to serve customers, but the new age requires a move from a legalistic, contractual view of delivering satisfaction to one where the customer is fully and wholly satisfied. This requires organizations to build structures and cultures to support the organization-wide responsibility to the customer, which leads to a recognition of personal responsibility to one's customer as the bedrock of sustained customer loyalty. For example, I had a carpet installed in my house. There was a flaw in it. Although I could have had the flawed area replaced with a small patch, the company wants to ensure that I'm completely satisfied and is replacing all 9 rooms of carpet. Hence, the fourth organizing principle for leaders: treat the customer as the final arbiter of service and product quality by offering an unconditional guarantee of complete satisfaction. Mental models, in Senge's term. From these principles, Nick and Orrin derive a series of initiatives that can be used to implement the principles. The details are covered in their book. In summary, Peter Senge believes a learning organization is founded on the 5 disciplines of personal mastery, mental models, vision, learning teams, and systematic thinking. An approach to incorporating those disciplines in the information age are captured by Nick Imparato and Orrin Harari in their organizing principles. Through implementation, organizations can release the power of human potential and reach new levels of performance. In the second segment, we'll share some stories of how companies are using these principles to become learning organizations. Now let's take a short break to see what questions you might have.
We are now having the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. We just ask you to please ask one question per call and to be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which now appear on your screen. First question is coming via fax from Brazil, from Fundação Vanzolini, Sao Paulo. In the fields of quality and productivity, the Japanese firms have often been more successful than Western ones. Does this mean that their organizations are more intelligent than ours?
I believe that because the Japanese began their quality journey quite a few years ago, that they started understanding how to connect the business, how to connect the processes, and probably took a leadership position in systematic thinking. Culturally, they've always had a very long-term vision of what they wanted to accomplish, and have always thought of the long term versus many of our companies here in the United States. But based on that, they started looking at the process and at the whole business, and then started taking the information that they learned, probably would think through quality, to help them become a learning organization. I don't necessarily think it's something that they have that no one else has. I believe that over time they have been able to develop it and become more of a learning organization than maybe many others. And I think that's more the key.
Now we have another fax coming from Baja California, from the Autonomous University from Baja California Sur. How can you implement techniques of the fifth discipline in a bureaucratic and obsolete system?
Well, I believe that if you look at implementing or creating a learning organization in an organization which is considered obsolete, you probably have to start with the marketplace. If the company or that particular organization takes a look at its market, is it in fact competitive in that market? What is its goal with reference to what it would like to do in that market? What does their company want to be recognized as? So what do they really stand for? What is their vision of what they want to do? Moving from that, then I think that the leadership of the organization needs to really reflect on what is it that they're doing in their role currently which would allow that business to be successful. If in fact, as we mentioned using Oren and Nick's principle, that if the leaders aren't leaders, they're really managing, and they haven't, and they're controlling the organization, in fact, you will probably not be nearly as successful as if you take the visionary perspective of how we're going to work and live and be successful in these markets. So I would say that the leadership has to look at the market, then look at themselves, look at what role they're playing, and then engage the people in the process.
La siguiente llamada viene de Sudamérica.
Next call is coming from Paraguay, South America.
Sí, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
La siguiente pregunta
The
es,
following question:
¿qué condiciones
what are the conditions, aptitudes, or abilities
facilitador
must a facilitator have within the processes of team working, and how do you foster
la organización?
their inclusion in an organization?
Okay. I believe that the role of a facilitator can be very effective in helping teams develop as teams. And to the point that how do you get them incorporated into the organization is really one which is based on the anxiety or how quickly the organization wants to address issues. And let me see if I can explain this a little differently. We all have many management meetings. And we know that our meetings can either be successful or less successful depending on what we've done during the meeting. I think we've all been at meetings where we have actually focused all of our energy on the issue that wasn't on the agenda. And that could be the political issue or some personal issues or some personal biases that some of the people in the meeting have, as opposed to focusing on the business issues. And I think the role of a facilitator and the skill set of the facilitator is to understand the differences between what the issues are at the meeting and continuing to bring the people back to the business issues and not the personal issues. The skill sets, I think, take some time to develop, but they're really not that difficult. Probably the most effective leaders and most effective managers actually have those skills, and they use those skills simultaneously with running a meeting. A few years ago, and I'll try to make this short, a few years ago I had the opportunity of going to a seminar where it very clearly pointed out that there are distinct roles between what a facilitator does, what the person who owns the meeting or the meeting manager does, clearly what the participants do, and then the idea of having someone there who is sort of the timekeeper, etc. And to be able to articulate and demonstrate each of those skills successfully is quite difficult, even for one person to do. But we traditionally in a meeting bring everyone together and we assume that the leader or the manager has those skills and can execute them simultaneously. That is very difficult. So I recommend that we use facilitators when we are in discussions that we need to be very focused on what we're trying to accomplish, where we have time constraints, and where we can bring some discipline to the meeting so that we can be that much more effective. I think that's a major problem that we all have in our businesses of running effective sessions.
Otra pregunta, esta nos viene de
Another
Sinaloa,
question
del
coming from
Colegio de
Sinaloa,
Bachilleres, Estado Sinaloa, Guasave.
Mexico.
Bienvenidos.
Gracias. Buenos
Thank
días.
you. Good morning.
El conductor mencionaba ahorita
You were just
que las
mentioning
empresas
that
requieren más
that
líderes que
enterprises
administradores.
require more leaders than administrators. However, how important
Que todo el mundo
is it for everybody to act as a leader, or do you think there should be different levels to develop leadership exclusively, or other levels where you have administrators or workers, just like in an army, for instance, where the general is the leader,
o bien
or
el carácter de liderazgo
or
tendrá que
do you
desarrollarse
think that the
en todos
leadership
los
ability
miembros
has
de la
to be
empresa?
developed in every single member of the enterprise, or every single worker or staff member of an enterprise?
Okay, that's a very good question. Thank you. There are roles that people play throughout the entire organization. And so I think as I speak of people becoming more leaders than managers, we're really looking at businesses that are moving into being more information-driven. And as you become a more information-driven business, you actually become a flatter organization because the barriers, the vertical barriers of organizational structures need to be broken so that the people that are working on teams in multiple disciplines can work effectively together. And if you're going to have that, you really can't have managers controlling what people are doing, as opposed to getting the information across the barriers so that everyone can speak and be more effective. So I would say that clearly, as you flatten the organization, you don't have as many managers or as many people in those positions. That's one item. I think the other is that as the leaders, what you're really looking at is a behavioral issue. More of, are we concentrating, spending our time on looking at the market and creating the vision for our business, establishing the values, working on the strategies of leading that business effectively into the future? As opposed to, are we more interested in controlling what people are doing within our organization, or essentially micromanaging the people within the organization? We need to move away from that, liberate the people to work effectively, collaborate within organizations and on teams to address the market. And I think that will be more effective. So more leaders, yes. Does everyone have to be a leader? I think everyone needs to be have the skills of articulating a leader, but there are clearly administrative roles which must be performed for your business to be successful. So don't get rid of all your managers.
Nos vamos ahora a Porto Alegre, Brasil. La llamada viene del Servicio Nacional
Now
de
we're
Aprendizaje
going to
Comercial,
Brazil.
SENAC.
We're
Bienvenidos.
this is a question from Brazil.
Lo escuchamos a Brasil.
Buenas tardes.
Sí, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
¿Yo puedo hacer la pregunta?
I'm going to ask
Sí,
the
bien
question.
pueda, adelante. Lo
Sí.
escuchamos.
Perfecto. La organización que no aprende...
The organization that does not learn will be a victim, will fall prey to globalization. Based on this premise, can you tell me what the new roles are within the organizations? Can you talk about of an executive, an educator, or an apprentice? Can you talk about all three?
Okay, I'm not sure I can address all three, but let me attempt to put some context on the question. As businesses migrate into a global environment, and as you think of any business migrating into a global environment, you think of the information that is necessary to be successful. the nuances of information and data coming in from around the globe, being looked at, being understood, being placed in the context of the market, being placed in the context of where the business is going and where it sees itself going. And so as you look at all of those items, you are really, I think, really challenged by the fact that unless we have vehicles where we can learn what this information is effectively and very quickly, that in fact we will not be successful. And I don't know that it needs to be distinguished that much by individuals or by discipline, as much as it is a requirement to have the ability and the facility to break down the barriers and communicate and collaborate effectively, getting information, learning it, and becoming sort of the brains of the organization, so the organization has learned and can become more successful.
Nos vamos ahora a Argentina, a la Universidad Nacional de Córdoba.
Argentina,
Bienvenidos
Córdoba.
a este programa.
Welcome. Well, that sounds like a ship.
Estamos...
Buenas tardes.
Nuestra pregunta es,
Our question is,
¿cuál es el principal
what is the main incentive or motivation